Dear Heavenly God, we thank you so much for bringing us all here together. We pray that you'll guide and lead in what is talked about and what is presented, and that you'll help us to understand clearly and bring in different viewpoints and different information that we each have been ascertaining, since there's so much to learn, there's so much to read, there's so much to go over. One person can't possibly know it all. So we appreciate that you bring us all here together so we can fine tune how we understand and what we're understanding and what we know. And we pray, Lord, that you will guide and lead each and every one of us, and as a group, that we can understand fully in our minds, in our hearts, in the group, what you want of us and what is needed, and how we can be faithful to the very end, Lord. We pray that you'll fill us with your Holy Spirit, give us wisdom, understanding, discernment, faith, hope, courage, and humility. And we pray all this in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so just didn't think, I've been thinking about, because I am still working on the Matthew 13 study, but thinking about what we understand of Ellen White saying the agitation of the Sunday law. Is there somebody that would like to define that as we see it today, as we're watching today? Somebody that can put some, open up that subject of, before we go to our first article, open up that subject of the agitation of the Sunday law. What is it? And how do we see it in the world today?
The agitation of the Sunday law, you mean like all that's going on with gender, abortion, LGBTQIA plus people?
Yeah.
This discrimination, the marginalization?
Marginalization, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me turn this fan down. I don't know if you can hear it, but it makes it hard for me to hear.
Yeah, so I was there's an article by AP, and it says, the headline is, "After the fall of Roe, emboldened religious conservatives lobby to restrict abortion in Africa." So basically the same thing that, they're pumping money into Africa for their laws to change, to discriminate against the LGBTQIA people. Now they're lobbying to do the same in Africa. So, it's just going on all around the world.
Yeah. Is that an article that you want to share or no?
I think this is the, because I was looking at, well, this is the one that I saved, and I saved, I thought it was the same article where it talked about President Biden. I don't want to misquote him, so I was trying to find what he said, and I guess this is not the same article, but basically, he said it best. But basically, what he said was, because he's a Catholic,
Mhm.
so it doesn't sound like the way he said it. It doesn't sound like he fully supports abortion, because of his Catholic views, but he says, but on the other hand, he says Roe v. Wade got it right, and I thought this was the same.
I wonder if it's, because it might be one that I have that I was considering tonight as well. Let me,
Yeah, and basically, the articles, you know, one of the leaders of the abortion movement, what she said was, when Biden said that, he's playing into the the right wing, because I mean, she didn't say why, but I'm thinking when she said that when he says
Right here.
something like that, that he's
right here.
Manson. I think that's it. President Biden is playing into the narrative that says, in spite of my faith, I support this. Yeah, he said, not big on abortion, but he believes that Roe v. Wade got it right. So
Yeah.
she says, President Biden is playing into a narrative that says, in spite of my faith, I support this. And it's a right-wing narrative that we should not give any energy to. It also creates shame and stigma around abortion, said Manson. Yeah, that's exactly the one I was reading.
Okay. Yeah, I read it earlier, I don't know, a couple days ago, I think. And it's talking about pro-choice Catholics.
Right.
And it was interesting because as I read it, what I'm seeing is this fight. My mind is on Matthew 13 with these articles that I read, trying to understand correctly all that has been shared on Matthew 13. And because just as a refresher, with what we did go through, for anybody that, if you remember, in Matthew 13, does anybody remember the title of the parable? In your Bible, it has a title. Most of the Bibles have the same title. Some might be very.
Parable of the tares?
Yeah, the tares. Do you remember the theme of the parable?
The theme is the final separation.
The final separation. So you have the servants, right? And what do the servants, who are the servants?
God's people.
Those people. And what do they do?
Oh, right now
Observe.
we're just observing.
They're observing. So they're not doing anything. And does anybody remember when they're observing? And doing nothing.
When
It's been like well over a month when we went over that, I think, probably even longer.
until the harvest.
Say that again.
Until the harvest.
Until the harvest. So then when do they observe?
Well, now in Sunday law.
Which one?
Well, Sunday law is when we should be able to differentiate between wheat and the tares, but we don't pluck them out, so we just observe, right?
The Sunday law? Yeah, and Susan put lighter rain. Susan's right. Sarah put COP, but no, not close of probation. The harvest is, I still got to keep it all straight in my head, but at the Sunday law, let me flip give me just a second to flip my board around, but I got some stuff I have to move to get the board out. Watch out, Sheila.
Harvest.
Just a second. Keep the conversation going and I'll be right back. Okay, wake up. I was hoping you'd keep discussing that as we, let me pull this over and spotlight it.
You know, when you read about, when you read different quotes in Ellen White about the agitation of the Sunday law, she mentions a few things that are kind of interesting. That when gender observance, or maybe we could use patriarchal observance. She mentions the southern states enforcing many of those laws first, which kind of is what we're seeing with these laws, right? And the other thing that I thought was kind of interesting in the agitation quotes was that during that time of agitation of this appropriate gender observance, cultural gender observance, however we want to word that, that's being agitated everywhere, and these deceptions are all over, right? Because I was also tying in, Elaine, how they passed, how that federal judge, one of Trump's federal judges, passed that law yesterday on the 4th of July, when no one's paying attention, to totally cut the hands of the Biden administration to do any oversight into correcting misinformation, AI, any kind of media outlet, you know, all the places where all this misinformation has, you know, began with the Putin-Trump time frame, right? And the fact that they cannot go in and correct any of it because it's thwarting the freedom of speech of the right wing, right? So they're allowed now to just wreak havoc with their kind of false narratives. And so what I was, how was I, there was one other thing I wanted to say. Oh, so, you know, where people are going to get to where they don't know what to believe. If there is no, you know, there has to be a time that's ripe, I'm thinking, where we're not just observers. There has to be a time where people are becoming so agitated and so enlightened about what is occurring that they will be sort of, that would be the ripe time to, if we have access to certain people, to then give them the information that will help steer them correctly, because everything is going to get so, you know, confusing. Anyway, it was something else, but you know, I can't remember what I was going to say. I apologize. Just doing the best I can.
Sarah asked what was the question again. I was asking when do the observers observe? What were you going to say, Phil? Were you going to say something? Or Jackie?
The observers are doing this in the time of the latter rain, aren't they? Because it's the fruit. They see the fruit,
Right.
but they can't touch it. They can't touch them.
Right.
They can't throw them out, or, you know, even if they come to a conclusion, that's not our work.
This was, I believe, where we left off with this, but yeah, it's in the Sunday law history where they observe. And what I'm working on is to the classes that he did that show who the us is that is used, is it the priest, so that we can have that straight. So I think I have it, but I don't want to go into it tonight because I know I'll miss details. But so the Sunday law, we see the agitation in here. And that's what we're seeing in the news. And one thing Susan brought up, which is a good point, what we saw yesterday with that federal judge that you just explained it, that made a law, whatever it had to do with towards social media and the fact checking and removing things that were misinformation and such, and they're calling that free speech, and we're interfering with their free speech, or their free speech is being interfered.
Yeah,
So
I got cut off. I just got back on, so I don't know what I missed. But anyway, keep going. Can you hear me?
yeah. Yeah,
A big delay. I can tell by my internet's unstable. I'm sorry. I'll just have to do in the chat.
okay. Yeah, it sounds kind of weak right now, wobbly. So anyway, so the agitation is here, which is we're in here, headed to here. And
Right.
and the priest or the servants are observing in this history, which that article that Phil was just mentioning, which I had read too. I'll pull that one up and we'll go through it. It comes down to knowing definitely how to sift, but the fight, this is what we're seeing is the fight that is going on, and what do we do? According to the parable, we observe it. If we didn't know what's going on, what would we see? If we didn't have the information we have, what would we see?
Oh, we wouldn't be seeing anything.
Yeah, we'd just probably be on one side or the other without being
Yeah,
able to recognize.
We'd probably be on the losing side.
You know what?
We'd probably be on the losing side.
Yeah. Yeah. So this article here does go through, let's see, one of the articles seemed as though the Catholics were trying to gain control of the abortion narrative. Yeah, and that's this one, Susan. This one here, the pro-choice Catholics. I don't have it into a PDF, so we'll try to keep the all the advertisements blocked out of there. Okay, so and this is a pro-choice Catholic organization. It is one that talked about what Phil was saying, talked about Biden and the stand that Biden takes as a Catholic. So since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade a year ago, reproductive rights have become an even more contentious issue in an already polarized landscape. With more than 1,500 politicians, mostly men, helping ban abortions since Roe fell, Catholic and pro-choice organizations are increasingly trying to carve out space for themselves in the nationwide dialogue to center their own messaging that being Catholic and pro-choice are not mutually exclusive. One organization trying to dismantle religious stigma surrounding abortions is Catholics for Choice, a Washington, D.C. based Catholic abortion rights advocacy group. For the Catholics for Choice, the belief in individual reproductive rights comes as a result of the Catholic faith, not in spite of. The belief in individual reproductive rights comes as a result of the Catholic faith, not in spite of. Speaking to The Guardian shortly after President Joe Biden, a Catholic, said at a recent fundraiser in Maryland that although he is not big on abortion, he believes that Roe v. Wade got it right. CFC President Jamie Manson said that despite Biden's good model of not imposing one's religious beliefs on civil law, his message echoed right-wing sentiments. President Biden is playing into a narrative that says, in spite of my faith, I support this. It's a right-wing narrative that we should not give any energy to. It also creates shame and stigma around abortion, said Manson. In the US, 63% of Catholic adults say that abortion should be legal in all or most cases, according to 2022 survey conducted by the Associated Press, NORC Center for Public Affairs Research. Additionally, 68% say that Roe v. Wade should have been left as is. In a separate survey conducted by the Guttmacher Institute, 24% of abortion patients identified as Catholic. Catholics overwhelmingly support abortion is because their faith taught them the values of social justice, of the power of individual conscience, and of religious freedom. Catholic women who participate richly in the life of the church are having abortions, and they have to hear from an all-male hierarchy that when they choose abortion, they're participating in homicide, said Manson. That message is profoundly spiritually violent, she said, adding, this is a real pastoral crisis in the church that Catholics don't want to look at. Every time a high-profile Catholic says, even though in spite of my faith I support abortion, it reinforces that stigma. We need to dismantle this narrative. To Manson, there are three important ideas deeply embedded in the Catholic tradition, which help fuel her organization's pro-choice beliefs. The first is one in this notion of individual conscience. The Catechism says explicitly, in all that we say and do, our individual conscience is what tells us what is just and right, not the church. So even if what our conscience tells us to be right, to be just and right, conflicts with the church teaching, we have to go with our conscience, she said. The next idea is the tradition of social justice, said Manson, which contradicts with the profoundly negative impacts that abortion bans have on already marginalized communities. Abortion bans and restrictions disproportionately harm people who are already suffering injustices like racism, poverty, immigration laws, and domestic violence. The very people that we as Catholics are supposed to prioritize, the marginalized, are the ones who have their suffering exacerbated by abortion bans and restrictions. So there is a deep conflict with our social justice tradition. The third and perhaps most oft repeated idea to Manson and other pro-choice faith leaders is religious pluralism. Catholic teaching supports and respects religious pluralism. And what right-wing Catholics are trying to do is have their theological ideas codified into civil law. By doing that, they're infringing on the religious freedom of everyone else. Our religious freedom guarantees not only our right to practice our beliefs, but our right to be free of the beliefs of others. And so abortion bans and restrictions take away religious freedom. With far-right Catholic lawmakers continuing to double down on their anti-abortion stances and conservative Christian legal nonprofits funding anti-abortion organizations, the communities that CFC tries to focus on are those that are silent about their support for abortion. We focus on that population because the majority already are there with us. They're just afraid to speak about it publicly, and that's because, again, of the shame, stigma, and punishment that comes from the church when you dare to question this teaching. We prefer to cater to that population, and we give them information that they need to strengthen their own arguments from a place of faith, she said. Susan says, let's see, that article sounded like A.T. Jones' argument against all enforcing a Sabbath. Yeah, here's this one here, I think. Is that what you're talking about?
The one above where it talks about our right to be free of beliefs of what other people's beliefs are. Basically, that was kind of what A.T. Jones was saying, right? You know, we don't want a Sunday law, but no, we wouldn't want a Sabbath law either, because that would also be pushing forth, right?
Yeah. So let's see here. So We focus on the population on that.
Right there where
Go ahead.
the the one where it said hour, the one where it said hour. Go up. If you go up, can you hear me?
Yes.
No. Up. No, then I mean down.
I'm not sure if you're seeing the screen because I think this is.
I don't see it.
Oh, okay.
It's not on my screen. Yeah, there it is. Our religious freedom guarantees not only our right to practice our beliefs, but our right to be free of the beliefs of others. And so
And
I
so-
think that's the one, that's the sentence that reminded me of A.T. Jones'
Yeah,
argument.
but we have to remember it's
Because abortion bans and restrictions would take away religious freedom from others, right?
yeah,
Because they harm people.
yeah. And we want to remember it's a Catholic organization that is saying this, as we would remember who is the Catholic Church in prophecy. Who is the Catholic Church in prophecy?
Protestantism.
No,
isn't it?
you have Protestantism, but who's the Catholic Church?
Counterfeit.
The counterfeit.
Yeah.
The counterfeit. Okay, so we prefer to cater to that population and the marginalized. We prefer to cater that. I think that's what she's talking about. I lost my place here. We focus on that population because the majority already are there with us. They're just afraid to speak about it publicly. And that's because, again, of the shame, stigma, and punishment that comes from the church when you dare to question this teaching. We prefer to cater to that population, and we give them information that they need to strengthen their own arguments from a place of faith. This is Manson still speaking. So the other focus groups, CFS, is what the other focus group of CFS is what Manson calls the movable middle, which consists of people who do not know how they feel about abortion and do not feel welcome in the two polarized populations within the abortion debate. Manson goes on, there's a lot of disinformation that the right wing has put out about abortion over the last 50 years. And so we provide them with actual facts. We give them a space to discern how they feel about abortion and make a safe place for people for whom it is a complex issue. Another challenge for organizations like CFC is dismantling certain narratives that automatically enmesh the Catholic faith with anti-abortion stances. We have to I don't know what it means to progress. We have to progress pro-choice, progressive pro-choice, faith. We have progressive pro-choice, faithful voices speaking back and centered in the movement. We really need to counter religious narratives, and people who can do that best are religious people. People have to bear in mind the 5 justices that struck down Roe last year were all Catholic, said Manson. We really are fighting a religious force, so we have to center religious voices. We have to center religious voices and take back the narrative that we've ceded to this Christian right wing and say, no, because of my faith, I support abortion, and welcome people who feel conflicted about it rather than making them feel like they're creating stigma. Manson added that she doesn't think the pro-choice movement has done this well and really needs to, if we're going to transform hearts and minds around the issue. I think that they have to center faith voices because right now faith voices are marginalized. We need to widen our circle in the pro-choice movement and not create these absolutes and gatekeep each other on messaging. What are now that we've gone through that, what are your thoughts on this article and the CFC? Catholics for Choice.
Would, just a question, would they, with Pope Francis, they might be in not so much trouble. Because he is the socialist Pope that is for abortion, not against it. Just a question.
Yeah, when I read it, it made me think about the observers and how Mary says, as observers, we can see the spirit in Catholic faith on abortions and the rights of women. Yeah. So we're watching this battle that is, and this is the agitation of it, but we're watching it. It's really hard to express in words, but as observers, there's a war going on. If we were on a battlefield, we're up on the top of the hill and the two sides are down below in the valley fighting. And we're observing this fight. And the lines help us to understand what they're fighting about. But here you have a Catholic organization that is pro-choice, which we knew there were, we knew that Francis is. But where do they stand? Where do they stand on other things? Where do they stand on the LGBTQ community? Where do they stand on full women's rights? Where do they stand on these issues? So like Christine said early on, we have to really be good at sifting. Because to me, when I read this article, I'm thinking, well, that sounds really good. What are we missing when we read this article? Are we missing anything? Yes, Susan, they have the wrong idea about the body as the house and transgender issues. They have the wrong idea. We read that in another article, what, a week or two ago, that they have the wrong idea of the body. That it wasn't it Francis that actually said that? Or the bishops that said it, in that document that came out, that said that the body and the soul are intrinsically united. There's no separation. And that would imply that I don't know, it can imply a lot of things, but I'm thinking it can imply that the body can do something on its own without the mind directing it. But the body doesn't have that. The body is just the shell, the house in which we live. Any other thoughts on this?
Well, it's just on this issue, not knowing where they stand, the CFC, where they stand on other issues of gender. But I would say that on this issue, that they have it right. And so it's something that, we need to sift on, what they will say, and just keep in mind, knowing that papacy, Catholicism, is the counterfeit. So, when it comes to the other issues of gender, where do they stand? That we don't know. But I think just on this issue, they're on the right side.
Yeah, it appears that way in this article.
Yes. And what I'm seeing here, because it's about us as God's people, it's about us, the way we vote, how do we vote? So I think like a month ago, maybe, we talked about, oh, I don't remember her name now. But the lady that was running for the president,
Not Nikki Haley.
no, Democrat.
Oh, okay.
Oh, what was her name? We even looked her up.
Oh, I don't remember the name. I know who you're talking about though.
Yeah. So anyways, because I did not know this about Biden. So now knowing what I know about Biden, when it comes to voting, just because he's a Democrat, for us, is he the right person to vote for? That was a question that was going through my mind when I read this. Is this the right, even though this person, Joe Biden is a Democrat, is he the right presidential candidate that I should vote for? Knowing, because he kind of has a right wing, as she said, a right wing perspective. Like a libertarian perspective.
I'm remembering
So
something Elder Tess said in the Vespers classes when they talked about the vote in the election in Australia. Anybody remember that? And I don't remember this, the specific all the details, but she was talking about, I think it was, I don't know if Luke is with us or not. Is Luke with us? The Madison is the Green Party. I think that was what they were called. But anyways, I just remember one statement out of that conversation is that she went with what the best there was. And we'd have to go back to review it. But I'm thinking with what you're saying about Biden, if our vote, if we need to vote, yeah, it wasn't Elizabeth Warren, it was somebody we'd never heard of before. That she ran in 2016 as well, right, Phil? Or 2020?
yeah, she ran one. Yes, she ran once before. I don't know what year.
Yeah, and I know we'd never heard of her. Madeline or Marilyn or something. Yeah, that's what Susan says. I don't think there will be a perfect candidate for us, so I think that's right to go with the best candidate we can. So if voting is part of our, it's how we say what side we're on. I mean, what's our alternative? We're certainly not going to vote for the right.
Oh, no.
And I don't know that I think at this point, aren't we voting against the right? So yeah, what she says about him, he'll still stand for Roe, but yeah, let me go back to that where she said that about him back in the beginning, I think. He's playing into a narrative that says, in spite of my faith, I support this. Yeah, but we got it right. He's not big on abortion, but he believes that Roe got it right. Not big on abortion, but yet women should get to choose for themselves. Yeah, Kennedy, but no, her name was Madeline or Marilyn or something like that, I think. So just going off of what I remember Elder Tess saying, that if I understood it correctly, going for the the best party on offer. I think might have been how she said it. So, where is Biden on when it comes to LGBTQ? Yeah, and Kennedy seems to be if I understood him, he's like the far left. And what's that? What's the name of the window, Susan? You can type it in or starts with an O. Can't think of the, you've talked about it. Window where they meet. Yeah, Overton window, yeah. Because I think Kennedy is like far left, if I remember right, in conspiracy theories as well. So at least when it comes to voting. Anyway, so this article just made me think a lot of the role of we're just watching all this. And if we did not know what was going on, how would we be viewing it? And so we see it knowing this agitation that is happening and it's increasing rapidly. So I did have another one that I pulled up. If anybody has any last comments to make on that article, if not, we'll go on to this here. Going back to as well with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's term was full of whimpers, then it ended with a bang. So I have, like I said, I don't know how far we'll get, but because there was the other article that I mentioned where it seems to, it's a New York Times article that seems to paint Roberts as doing a good job of reining in that far right, those far right judges. And it seemed completely contradictory to what he's done to actually give that and say that about him. Yeah. Okay, so this one, though, was not that way. Chief Justice John Roberts spent months amassing institutional capital with centrist seeming rulings. This week, he cashed in with dramatic victories for the right. This was far more accurate than that other article. I think the words I used is trying to remember what planet was he on, to the writer on to say that, that Roberts is reigning in the far right, because he certainly didn't demonstrate that to me based on what we know in those last few days. Susan also pointed out, I had not heard of that, where they refer to the Supreme Court justices as a 3-3-3. 3 far right, I think 3 left and 3 center. Is that right, Susan? Yeah. So if liberals, and this was June 30th, if liberals expected a big course correction from a Supreme Court mired in ethics controversies and rocked by record low approval ratings, the justices' final decisions of the term laid that to rest. Moves by Chief Justice John Roberts in the weeks leading up to the grand finale seemed to signal an eagerness on his part to project an air of moderation. In surprising decisions on voting rights, election law, and other issues, he aligned with the court's liberal bloc, perhaps in the hope of showing that the court, dominated by conservatives, isn't always looking to take a wrecking ball to long-established precedent. I'm going to give it to somebody else to read, if somebody else would like to read.
I can,
Okay,
but if Roberts right there,
yeah,
but if Roberts amassed some political capital from those decisions, he swiftly spent it on Thursday and Friday. In the 3 most politically diverse cases of the term, the court issued polarized 6-3 decisions, 2 of which Roberts wrote himself and all of which delivered sweeping conservative victories on issues that are high priorities for the right. Quote, the last 2 days of the term were absolutely cataclysmic, and to the extent people were asleep at the wheel, it's because he kind of anesthetized them, said New York University law professor Melissa Murray. Okay, so who's she talking about? Who I just said the word, anesthetized them. Roberts?
That's what I think, or the people, but I think Roberts, he anesthetized, because you go back, it's talking about Roberts amassed political capital and then he spent it all. So the subject is Roberts, two of which Roberts wrote himself, delivered sweeping conservative victories, giving wins to the far right. So if I understood that correctly, he anesthetized them by siding with them, with the liberals, and people being relaxed on things. And then here comes these cataclysmic cases. I think that's what that's talking about.
So he anesthetized them. Is that the far right or the court or all the people?
Did you say the court? Did you say the court?
Yeah, the court, the
Yeah.
rest of the Supreme Court, the other 8, did he anesthetize them, or was he?
Or all the people?
Or all the people, or just the right? Who did he anesthetize? Roberts.
Anesthetize means to put them to sleep, right?
Yes.
So the way I understood this, and if somebody says otherwise, because I think she's redefining whoever it is, that in the weeks leading up to the grand finale, seemed to signal eagerness on his part to project an air of moderation. So would it be that there was this lull and put people to sleep in the fact that to sleep, if I understand correctly, to rest, that he's going to be fair and side. Is it wrong to say fair? I mean, to me, it seems it's right, but that he's not going to take this hard right stance. And was that meaning that there's this relaxation, that he's not going to take this hard right stance? And then suddenly Thursday and Friday, he completely upheaves that. So the people and the court, but the people maybe.
Yeah, it makes sense. Susan says, he's so deceptive, looks like a Boy Scout and seems meek in manner, but he has done so much years earlier to undo the civil rights. I agree, Susan, when you say that the people got comfortable because of those earlier surprise rulings, because they had made those two surprise rulings? And then we thought, okay, so they are going to be fair, and then no, they're not, because we knew before how they were going to rule on this, but then because they had given us those surprise rulings, and we thought that they were going to rule differently on those other two, we thought that they were going to rule correctly on this, and no, it's back to where we knew they were going to rule on, right?
Yes, and when you look at what the article that we read about him, the one that Kathy McGraw posted, that goes back into his history on the Voting Rights Act. So here he sides with the liberals in a voting rights case, a critical voting rights case. You shared the video on that Vox video that that actually was to the benefit of the Democrats when it comes to voting in Alabama. And as well, he sided with the liberals on the ISL theory case that was going on. And so knowing his history on voting rights, and then he makes that decision, I would think that kind of anesthetized people to think, oh, we're safe now.
Yeah.
We're safe now.
Yeah.
And throws a grand slam. Well, I guess couldn't be called a grand slam. It would be 3, right? It's like something like that. He had already kicked out the safety on voting rights with Section 2. Yeah. He left it in that they had to prove intent, knowing it is next to impossible to prove intent. Yeah. Okay, so are we all in agreement, understanding that? Is that correct? The correct understanding of this anesthetize them, the people?
That's the way I see it. Anybody,
And maybe even the liberal judges.
yeah, anybody have a different,
It wouldn't be those far right judges.
because they already knew.
They were angry, I'm sure. Well, we heard some of Thomas's comments.
So Susan says he had already kicked out safety on voting rights with section 2, and he had left in that they had to prove intent, knowing it is next to impossible to prove intent. Yeah, it is next to impossible to prove intent. Ketanji Brown Jackson gave a scathing rebuke, but she was so eloquent when she did it. Yeah. Okay, any other comments?
Generally see the civility. At least this is how I think this is how I see it. You generally see the civility and professionalism on the left. But when you go to the media bias chart and understanding and learning to sift the left, one of the things in the media bias chart that it talks about what makes them more biased is, even though they may be factual, they use a lot of emotion and emotion to stir your emotions, wording to stir your emotions. So to me, Ketanji Jackson, Brown Jackson, isn't it Jackson Brown? Brown Jackson, yes, speaks eloquent and professional with what she spoke. And if there is to stir, if it is to stir up emotion, she does it, in my view, without bias, not for bias reasons. Example, I know somebody, I didn't watch it, but I've seen a couple of videos by this NBC or MSNBC, I don't remember which one, but there was one posted, Joy Reid. Who knows who Joy Reid is? I think that's her name. Is that her name? Joy Reid?
Yeah. I've heard her a couple of times.
And when you, what's your thoughts when you hear her?
Oh dear, I don't hear her enough to really make a statement, opinion about her, other than she seems like she's straight on with the liberal agenda. I don't know if she falls in with completely with Biden or, you know, far left or what. I mean, they have a bias on the liberal side, of course.
But
You know.
what about the language that they use?
Yeah, I haven't recently listened to her, but I know who she is and I have heard her before. Not recently.
I remember before I was ever a Christian, I don't think I was reading the Bible, but I'm trying to think how far back it was. But like in the early days of Bill O'Reilly, Glenn Beck, some of them, and even some on NBC, I would be hearing two different sides. But I remember very specifically not watching any of those programs because I would get really irritated with it and ask myself, what happens? What happens? Why don't people just report the news anymore? So there's those that just report the news. And then there's those that throw in the criticism as they report the news. And the emotional language that stirs your emotions that, and in the media bias chart, that is one of the things that is mentioned when you're looking at the left. Even though they may be factual, some of them use language that stirs the emotions in a, I don't know the right words to use, that don't seem nice. And that may not even be the right way to say it. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts on Joy Reid. She was just one as an example, because I have watched her a couple of times and I usually wind up turning her off, because she throws in her own opinions and maybe sarcasm
Sorry.
when she's, you know, don't mean to be picking on her. There are plenty of others. Just she's fresh on my mind. They use certain rhetorical devices to get you to go along with them. It's very persuasive and bypasses higher reasons. Yeah, fast brain, yes. CNN is not reliable as it's now leaning. Yeah, that's been happening with CNN as well. Sarcasm is a rhetorical device, yeah. So so when they start throwing that in there, generally that's when I turn them off, because I don't want my emotions stoked. I want my slow brain to process the actual information and not have that, even though I know I'm guilty of using it myself in my own conversations. So I need to be more broken of than I am. Anyway, so that's something to keep in mind as well when we report the facts, not your emotional opinions.
Mhm. It's an opposite with Rachel Maddow.
Yeah,
She just reports and gives the information.
she does put a little bit of emotion into it, but it kind of goes back to with Katanya Jackson Brown, Brown Jackson. I know I keep saying that backwards. I think what did Susan? How did she say it? Gave a scathing rebuke because it was factual. It was true, and it needed to be said. But I don't think that we need to be, if you're going to be reporting the news, it's not to be, yeah, calm and composed, not all wrapped up in emotion. Yeah, I struggle with the words to put in, to use the right words. I hope that what poor job I did of explaining it, we kind of understand the opinions, right? I just remember in the very early days, I couldn't stomach having Bill O'Reilly on and other programs like that. And on the liberal side as well, there would be those that would be that way too. Like on CNN, when was one that got, well, quite a few, it seems like lately, got fired. Not Lemon, but before him, Chris, the Cuomo, is that his name? They get really emotional with what they're doing. Yeah, and they are a very emotionally charged issue. Anyway, so I'll leave it at that because I know I'm doing a poor job of explaining it, but hopefully we understand. And you can read it in articles. You can read that in articles as well. When I mean, how do I mean that? You can hear it when you're reading articles. You can hear when the author is you know, giving you straight truth or facts, things that you can research and see, or when they're throwing their emotional opinion on it as well at the same time.
Any other comments? Let's see. But if Roberts amassed some political capital from those decisions, he swiftly spent it on Thursday and Friday in the three most politically divisive cases of the term. The court issued polarized 6-3 decisions, 2 of which Roberts wrote himself, and all of which delivered sweeping conservative victories on issues that are high priorities for the right. Okay, so we read that one already, and we talked about anesthetize them. So the last 2 days of the term were absolutely cataclysmic, and to the extent people were asleep at the wheel, it's because he kind of anesthetized them, said New York University law professor Melissa Murray. Last June, the 6-justice conservative majority, cemented by former President Donald Trump, flexed its muscles for the first time, with Roberts sometimes on the sidelines, as he was when the 5 other conservatives overturned Roe versus Wade. This term, he seemed intent on regaining some control. Earlier this month, the Chief Justice broke with his own history in voting rights cases, taking the helm as the court in a 5-4 vote sided with Black voters in a Voting Rights Act case challenging alleged racial gerrymandering. The decision, which drew sharp dissents from the conservative bloc, is expected to help Democrats win several congressional seats in 2024.
So after reading that article last week on him, it's really hard to imagine. We don't have to imagine he did it. It's hard to it could be hard to understand. Then what was all this about? Why did he do this? And what reasoning in his mind, understanding his history, was to do this? And I have a hard time not thinking that it's all part of some deceptive game.
Yeah, like there's an ulterior motive.
Yeah, I mean, if that's correct to say that, because this does not mesh with his history whatsoever to do this. If it was maybe some other case, like with the ISL theory, okay, kind of seems like he could do it, but his history is very adamant when it comes to the Voting Rights Act and his purposes and motives behind that, and then to let this one go, the ulterior motive seems to be, I'm going to make myself look good here. I don't know if I'm going to say this right. I'm going to make myself look good here because I'm going to really drop the bomb tomorrow.
I see your reasoning, but I think I don't know, it's my opinion, but it
It's
seems
okay, because I don't know that I'm right.
no, because it wouldn't have mattered. You know what I mean is, like, he still could have, even if he voted the other way on that one, he still could have voted the way he did on these others, right? It didn't make a difference. So I have, I don't know, just a suspicion that there's something in the wording of that other one that's gonna end up being in their favor in the long run, if that makes sense.
That's what you're saying. Susan says, I think it's because he knew that case would not really matter because of all the work done and being done to gut the rights.
That could be. That could totally be.
Yeah. Good thoughts to share. Thanks.
And what if they talk amongst themselves and say, well, if you vote this way, I'll vote the other way on this other one, and maybe I don't know.
Strike a deal.
Yeah, strike. Do they do that? I mean, they shouldn't be striking deals on the Supreme Court, but they do that in the House and the Congress all the time. So I don't know how they play the game. And right now it does seem like a game.
Dude, you shouldn't strike a deal. Sure, you shouldn't take $500,000 vacations off your rich friend donating to you either.
Exactly.
You pick and choose what suits them. Yeah.
Yeah, good conversation. I was reading an article. It's related to the Supreme Court, and it's all about reform. And from the Brennan Center, this information, I get their articles and stuff on my phone, and they're following the Supreme Court and how far off kilter it is. I mean, it's not the word exactly to cover it, but the Supreme Court is so biased, we know, and it needs reform, and there's a huge movement going on to reform the Supreme Court. I could say it simply, but I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars that people are giving to this program, or whatever they, wherever they're going to start to try to reform it. But what would it take? It's going to take votes to reform it. How can they do that? To bring in something that is fair, especially on the conservative side. And I was just reading this article as we were talking here, wondering how far is this going to go, and will it really be of any help for the amount of money that it's going to cost, to try to change it and make it more fair when it's political. So I'm just throwing that out there because it is a possibility of reform, and the people are screaming for it. The public are screaming for reform in the Supreme Court. And the people themselves see what's going on there. So, and it would be especially those that are on the liberal side. And this has been going on for a long time. It's just really just black and white almost now. If you look at it, how they vote. So, yeah, just some comments. I thought I'd bring that in.
Mary puts in a question, are we watching the harvest begin? Come in on the right. I don't know that we can say that, because we know that it's at Sunday law that the harvest that's in the latter rain, let's see. Not the harvest. I have to think this. I always have to think that through. But it's a Sunday law where with the best I understand it is all of this leads up to, and all the external prophets, the journalists, leads up to what decision people make with everything out in the open. So we are seeing the fruit ripen, and we're going to see far more, knowing that when you transition into the harvest period, we're still observing now, but that's the time of observance. But it's how they vote. I believe maybe somebody remembers exactly how Elder Tess worded it, but great controversy is about an election. And all of this revolves around the election cycle. So the harvest isn't until close of probation. Let me just pull that up there. I always get myself twisted around and have to think this through to make sure I say it right. Did you have? I do have it. The plowing, the early rain, and then the latter rain, and then the harvest. So it's not even harvest in here for the world. I think the reason I know why I still stumble in this area here is because we look at the harvest. That's 144,000, but I think we need to better understand this history, because this is the line. It's 144,000 line. But what does Jesus in Matthew 13 What is Jesus called? I'm trying to think of the right way to ask that question. Talks about the servants and what else? Fruit ripens early and falls off the trees.
Servants and the reapers?
No, I'm not looking for the reapers. What does he call the place?
Field?
The field, right? He calls it the field. And what does he define the field?
The world?
Say, what'd you say?
The world is the field?
The world. He defines it as the field is the world. And then there's God's people in the world. So we're looking at this line that represents the world. And this being the latter rain, the agitation is not the latter rain. And then this is the harvest over here. The agitation is not the latter rain, but we're able to see the agitation. And so whatever we see happening here only gets worse here. And the fruit, I think it was, let me see what Susan said there. Some fruit ripens early and some falls off the trees. But what we saw so far in what we've been reviewing is that the fruit goes from immature to mature. So this is just the agitation that we're seeing. This is when the fruit ripens. It's immature to mature at the close of probation. Then the reapers come and harvest. So, while we might be able to say we can see who they are, I don't want to go too far into that because I don't want to miss some of the points of the study that I'm working on to jump ahead. But it will help us prayerfully to better understand the line of the priests when it comes to the study of Matthew 13. Is there an early barley harvest of sheaves for Satan? I don't know. So anyways, what we are witnessing the agitation, but it's at the Sunday law where you see the fruit and it's immature fruit. And the fruit will go from immature to mature in that period of time. You want to go ahead, Christine?
Sure, yeah. Last June, the 6th Justice Conservative majority, cemented by former President Donald Trump, flexed its muscles for the first time, with Roberts sometimes on the sidelines, as he was when the 5 other conservatives overturned Roe versus Wade. This term, he seemed intent on regaining some control. Earlier this month, the Chief Justice broke with his own history in voting rights cases, taking the helm as the court in a 5-4 vote sided with Black voters in a Voting Rights Act case challenging alleged racial gerrymandering. The decision, which drew sharp dissents from the conservative bloc, is expected to help Democrats win several congressional seats in 2024. Then Roberts again took the pen as the court refused to embrace a radical legal theory that could have given state legislatures far-ranging powers over elections. So potentially even the power to nullify disputed elections, much as Trump and his allies tried to do in 2020. In other fractured decisions, okay, so wait. So he did refuse to embrace the radical legal theory. So the RSL theory so was that voted down? Because I thought I heard that they had voted against it. And then I heard they hadn't voted it yet. And then I was like, okay, so I got all confused so did they vote on that? And they voted?
Yeah, that one was settled and Roberts favored against the ISL theory. So yes, it was knocked down and I know, I don't remember the exact words, but Thomas had some choice words to say about it.
He was upset. Thomas was upset that it was
I think he was upset that it even came to the court, or that they even still made a decision on it, because in the process of time, North Carolina had swung over to a conservative majority court. So they took it back to the North Carolina Supreme Court. And the North Carolina Supreme Court settled the matter in favor of the ISL theory, if I remember right. And so Thomas, if I have it correct, was upset because we shouldn't have even had to weigh in on it.
okay.
If anybody has, if I'm incorrect on that, that's how I remember it, but don't have a good memory.
Okay.
So
Cool.
yes, the Supreme Court did rule on it, and
Ruled
Roberts
against-
sided with the liberals against it.
Okay, great.
So those two cases, the gerrymandering one in Alabama, and then the ISL theory.
Okay, great. In other fractured decisions rebuffing adventurous conservative legal arguments, Roberts voted with the liberals to sustain President Joe Biden's immigration policy and uphold the Indian Child Welfare Act. Okay, so they're siding against immigrants and LGBTQ, right?
Say that again.
So in their voting recently, they're voting against immigrants and LGBTQ.
The main one was the affirmative action. This one here is saying that he sided as well. Roberts voted with the liberals in favor of Biden's immigration policy and uphold the Indian Child Welfare Act. So there's three of these cases. Then you have
I thought they put, so did they vote against Roberts? Because I thought that one, okay, I misunderstood. Yeah, go ahead.
Roberts went with the liberals
Uh-huh,
on the Alabama case, the voting rights case, the gerrymandering.
uh-huh.
So that was a pro-democratic win. Then he also sided with the liberals and refused to embrace the ISL theory.
Okay.
And then also voted with the liberals to sustain or uphold Biden's immigration policy and uphold the Indian Child Welfare Act.
Okay,
So these all came down in the previous days prior to those last 2 days. I don't remember the dates on, I think Alabama one was earlier in June.
okay. So these opinions seemed of a piece with the Chief Justice's reputation as a pragmatic institutionalist seeking to protect the court amid intense criticism. But some observers warned his moves were mere feints aimed at preserving the veneer of respectability around the court, even as the conservative majority's project to dramatically reshape American law marched on. Okay.
So he was, a lot of the opinions were saying that he was trying to uphold the reputation of the court. the legitimacy of the court.
Okay,
And then in the last 2 days, he sides on some of the most significant of all the cases. He sides with the conservatives.
okay.
The supermajority wants to dramatically reshape American law.
March on, okay. The unusual alliances and cross-cutting cleavages. The unusual alliances and cross-cutting cleavages. That sounds rude.
Cleave like a cleaver? Is that what that means? Cross-cutting cleavages, cleaver?
Okay, so I'm just, my brain's in the gutter. My bad, sorry. The unusual, sorry, the unusual alliances and cross-cutting cleavages that marked some of the term's earlier decisions were nowhere to be found on Thursday and Friday as the court's highest profile cases came down on predictable ideological lines.
Yeah, so the unusual alliance is that he was siding with the liberals, like on the Voting Rights Act, with, his history on the Voting Rights Act. We read that. And so they're calling it an unusual alliance that he had with the left side of the court.
Okay,
And none of that is nowhere to be found on Thursday and Friday, as the court's highest profile cases came down on predictable ideological lines, all 6 of them.
when the smoke cleared, the decades-long use of race to achieve diversity in college admissions was effectively dead, as was Biden's marquee policy for giving student debt for tens of millions of Americans, and the high court's 2-decade-plus string of decisions expanding the rights of the LGBTQ community was stopped in its tracks and beaten back by a ruling upholding the right of business owners to refuse service to same-sex couples on free speech grounds.
So another, some of the other things that I've seen going on, like within Twitter, I think Susan shared a couple of them with me as well, is that, I don't know if she can talk to explain this better to make sure I don't mix it up. That you have the side that is just lost when it comes to affirmative action. For instance, maybe I'm thinking of the free speech one. I'm not going to say it well enough. I don't know if Susan's able to talk about how the other side is flipping the tables and using these rulings to now fight against, to have their own rights of free speech. And then when it comes to affirmative action as well. And I'm doing a bad job. Susan, if you're able to, I know you've read some of those articles. Maybe she's not able to. Give me just a second and I'll see if I can find at least a couple of the memes that show it. Oops, I hope I don't close our article that we're reading. Maybe I'm not going to be able to find it quick enough. But you can see in some of the Twitter feeds how they're turning around and using the free right, the free speech, and flipping it around on it. I'll wait. If I can find stuff monitor, Susan can comment on it later. We'll look at an article on that later. But it was just another thing that showed me this fight that we're watching transpire. Let me find our article that we're on. There we are. Okay. Maybe somebody else is familiar with what I'm talking about. Okay, right here.
continue, right?
Yeah,
Some analysts say the idea that the Roberts-backed decisions earlier in the term were truly centrist is misguided because they were actually rejections of radical positions, like the contention that state legislatures should be able to alter any aspect of election rules or even overturn election results without state courts or state constitutions playing any role. Quote, the Roberts Court should get zero credit for the idea that the independent state legislature doctrine being rejected is any kind of moderation, said Fordham law professor Jed Sugarman. That just Overton window talk. That's just Overton window talk. He added,
do you remember what the Overton window is? What Susan's brought up a few times? Where you have the, I hope I say it right. You have the far left and the far right. They're so far right that and the far left is so far left that they wind up coming around and meeting together.
oh, right, okay, I got you. That's just Overton window talk, he added, referring to a strategy that seeks to shift the debate in a particular direction by floating a previously unthinkable possibility and then backing away from it. Sugarman also said some of the maneuvering by Roberts and his colleagues is hard to reconcile, like acknowledging the need to rely on race in litigating Voting Rights Act cases, but entirely reproaching the practice in college admissions. Quote, it's hard to square all of that colorblindness rhetoric from the affirmative action case, while they were at the same time writing a very much rightly not colorblind interpretation of the Voting Rights Act, Sugarman said. It's hard to read those two decisions next to each other, no doubt. So basically, they're just making the law so confusing, just like the media, that you don't know where you stand.
That's part of it. It sure seems. We saw that in that article we read about Roberts.
Yeah,
They do make everything so complicated that that people really don't know, unless they're really, really paying attention and wanting to understand. They're just taking what they see on the surface. And when you just take what you see on the surface, all these little, well, they're big things now, but all these little things that they've done along the way, and many big ones, if you just take what you see on the surface, eventually the damage is all going to implode on us.
exactly.
Floodgate, yes, opening floodgate. Especially with the hypothetical, that's like, because there's art, I don't know if anybody's been reading those articles too, but there's articles out there talking about the 303 creative ruling, about how, I think we talked about it last week as well, but there are other articles since being even stronger on that, how she didn't even have somebody. And I remember we did read that a long time. We knew that she didn't have anybody. She hadn't even started creating websites. What she did was totally preemptive, but yet in the case, recorded in the case, filed in the case, was some man named Stewart that commented, I guess, through the website, that he is marrying his partner named Mike and wanted some wedding invitations, things like that done. And then, yeah, ProPublica broke the story, wanted to have some invites done and some other things, and possibly a wedding website. And that was all part of the filing. And I don't recall us necessarily hearing it in the case, but it was in the filing. And so when the media found out, was it ProPublica that contacted him? New Republic is who contacted this man named Stewart, who it turns out is has been married to a woman for 15 years and did not contact her through her website. That sounds pretty crazy. So the whole thing was a hypothetical that she wanted to make sure. She knew that if she wanted to put on her website that she's not going to serve, kind of like the way I understand it, if this is the right way to say it, but this is the way I kind of understand it. It helps me realize, think about it, that, you know, like we used to see the signs, no shirt, you know, going into a restaurant, no shirt, no suit, shoes, no service. She wanted to post on her website that she, because of her religious beliefs, she couldn't serve gay people. And she knew that it was against Colorado law, because Colorado law says you're not allowed to discriminate. So what is it, the ADL? Is that, who was it? I don't know if I have the right information. The group that basically took her through it, supported her and helped her with it all. Took in, trying to remember who it was. Maybe somebody put it in the chat if you remember who it was, but backed her for all of this. Smith had handlers, I think, because Masterpiece also came out of Colorado. Yeah. So there were those that, yes, that helped her along in this, but it was purely on a hypothetical, and she wanted to get permission, basically. Don't even know if permission's the right word. She wanted to be able to legally discriminate. So when she did in the future start creating websites, she wanted to be able to legally discriminate. I don't know enough about the law, but that doesn't seem right, to be able to take a case that doesn't even exist and win the legal right to discriminate. Yeah, I don't know if those signs are probably not right to have to anyone. Yeah, that would be the libertarian sign.
Any other comments? I muted myself. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Some conservative legal experts pointed to the immigration case in which the court tossed out a challenge to the Biden administration's priorities for arresting and detaining people living in the country illegally. The decision snubbed both the state of Texas and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, both of which have played key roles in recent years to advance legal challenges to policies ranging from immigration to abortion. Quote, Texas and the Fifth Circuit didn't do particularly well at the court this term, said Jonathan Adler, a law professor at Case Western Reserve University. At the same time, that doesn't mean affirmative action is okay, or the Biden student loan program is okay, end quote. Roberts' sensitivities about the court being seen as wantonly overturning precedent were on particular display in the affirmative action case, where his opinion seemed to rule out the use of race in admissions in the way most elite colleges and universities use it these days. Yet he stopped short of overruling the 2003 precedent that blessed continued use of race as a factor in the arena, Grutter versus Bollinger.
So let me see if I can, I didn't want to cut you off when I had my memory hit me with some of the issues with the college cases. Maybe you've seen it in the news talking about the legacy admissions. Is that the word you use for that? legacy, meaning that children of alumni,
Yes.
they want to get rid of that. And this is the liberal side now,
Yeah.
saying that they want to get rid of that because that is also allowing discrimination in the colleges, or affecting discrimination in the colleges, because mainly the ones that come in from legacy, like nepotism, are coming in are the wealthy white students that, and they get in, if I understood some of the articles I read on it, they don't get in on merit.
Right. They get on their family's history,
Yeah,
money.
which I think from what I read, and maybe it only spoke about one college or a couple colleges, I don't remember, but I was reading like 40% of the admissions are legacy admissions,
Wow, that's huge. That's huge.
if I read it correctly,
Yeah. But it makes sense.
but it was a lot.
Yeah.
And that right there, if that continues, then that, if it's 40%, I please don't quote me on that. But that's how I'm remembering it, but it may have been specific to certain colleges, I don't remember, but it was a lot. So if a lot of the admissions are already, let's say it is 40%, if 40% of the admissions are these legacy admissions, and they're generally white, then you only have 60% of the admissions left to go. And you can't go by race. So that's kind of what I was trying to describe as this back and forth fight that is going on. And that's one aspect of it.
That approach might have kept some critics from asserting that the court was again grinding up precedent, but for the fact that both Justice Clarence Thomas, who signed onto Roberts' ruling, and Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who dissented from it, said the decision did effectively overrule Grutter despite Roberts' hedging. I don't really understand that sentence, but okay, so
I don't think I got that one quite either. We can go back and read it back again.
yeah, I think I need to go back that way. Okay, Roberts' sensitivities about the court being seen as wantonly overturning precedent were on particular display in the affirmative action case. Okay, so Roberts' sensitivities about
people seeing him overturning precedent. He's aware of it and conscious of that. The people are seeing the court being seen as overturning precedent are on display in the affirmative action case.
Okay. Where his opinions seem to overrule, so I'm making up words, where his opinions seem to rule out the use of race in admissions in the way most elite colleges and universities use it this day. Where his opinions seem to rule out the use. So he's saying, let's not do that. We shouldn't use race in admissions in the way that most elite colleges and universities use it these days.
But you have the check boxes where you have to put your race.
Right.
On the admissions.
Okay.
Forms.
Okay. Yet he stopped short of overruling the 2003 precedent that blessed continued use of race as a factor in that arena, Grutter versus Bollinger.
Okay, so if I followed that correctly, he didn't quite go so far as to we'd have to understand the Grutter v. Bollinger case to understand what that's all talking about, if anybody knows what it is. He stopped short of overruling the 2003 precedent that blessed continued use of race. So whatever that continued use of race that was in Grutter v. The continued use of it seems like to leave those boxes, but that's what they overturned, was to remove those boxes. So I don't know if I quite understand that either, because they did get rid of the box. So we'd have to understand Grutter v. Bollinger.
Says in Wikipedia, Grutter versus Bollinger was a landmark case of the Supreme Court of the United States concerning affirmative action in student admissions. The court held that a student admissions process that favors underrepresented minority groups did not violate the Fourth Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, so long as it took into account other factors evaluated on an individual basis for every applicant. The decision largely upheld the court's decision in Regents of the Universities of California versus Big, which allowed race to be a consideration in admissions policy, but held racial quotas to be unconstitutional. In Gatz versus Bollinger, a separate case decided on the same day as Grutter versus Bollinger, the court struck down a points-based admission system that awarded an automatic bonus to the admission scores of minority applicants. Okay, so you wouldn't automatically get a check or an extra 10 points or whatever if you were a minority, to up your score and make it equitable. It goes on, but I don't know, just legal jargon, I think.
Yeah, that was kind of a complicated one for me. Not what you read, but just this paragraph. Robert sensitivities about the court being seen. So he's sensitive. He doesn't want the court to be seen, whatever wantingly. I'm thinking haphazardly. I don't know what wantingly is. Meaning they want to. He's sensitive about the court. He doesn't want the court to be seen as overturning precedent lustfully. Okay, thank you. More subtly, rather, right? They want to do what they do subtly instead of openly, wanting, lustfully, or passionate about it. He doesn't want the court to be seen as eagerly overturning precedent. And this was on display when he did the affirmative action case, because he doesn't want to give the idea. Again, it's going back to that wanting to have the court look legitimate, I think. He's according to, we read that in a lot of the opinions, and this article is kind of going back and forth on that he's sensitive to being viewed as overturning all these precedents. But in the affirmative action case, he voted strongly with overturning precedent, where it says where his opinion seemed to rule out the use of race in admissions. And the way that they did it was you had the boxes on there that you had to check, as they do it these days. Yet he stopped short of overruling the precedent that blessed continued use of race as a factor in that arena. And that approach might have kept some critics from asserting that the court was again grinding up precedent. So it kind of sounds like there's something slick and subtle that's gone on in here. That approach might have kept some critics from asserting that the court was again grinding up precedent, but for the fact that both Justice Clarence Thomas, who signed on Robert's ruling, and Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who dissented from it, said the decision did effectively overrule Grutter, despite Robert's hedging. So it sounds like he was trying to make the court still look legitimate, but he didn't.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that approach might have kept some critics from asserting that the court was again grinding up precedent, but for the fact that both Justice Clarence Thomas, who signed on to Robert's ruling, and Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who dissented from it, said the decision did effectively overrule Grutter despite Roberts' hedging. One of the challenging aspects of the past year for Roberts has been public criticism on the court by its own members, chiefly by Justice Elena Kagan, who embarked on a speaking tour last year in which she repeatedly accused her Republican-appointed colleagues of reaching decisions that were more grounded in politics and personal preference than in law. That critique resurfaced Friday in the student debt ruling as Kagan said the GOP-appointed supermajority was exceeding its proper role. At one point,
They're more grounded in politics than, let's see, more grounded in politics than personal preference to the law. So they're not doing their job.
right. At one point, Kagan declared that a court acting like a court would have dropped the case on the ground that the 6 GOP-led states that sued lacked any direct interest in the loan forgiveness program. While the phrase may sound innocuous, it is one Kagan has used on prior occasions to accuse her colleagues of abandoning legal principle and using cases to achieve policy objectives. Roberts devoted the final passage of his majority opinion in the student loan case to
Rebutting.
thank you, rebutting Kagan's critique while also airing the kind of discomfort he has publicly expressed about criticism that seems aimed at the court's legitimacy rather than individual decisions. It has become a disturbing feature of some recent opinions to criticize the decisions with which they disagree as going beyond the proper role of the judiciary, Roberts wrote, insisting that the court's ideological fractures are merely reasonable disagreements about how to apply traditional tools of judicial decision-making.
I don't I don't even understand. They're not, they're not, I feel wrong in saying this because, you know, I have a high school education, but with what we've learned and then paying attention to these things, they aren't even qualified to do the job.
That's what Elder
And
Herman,
they have these lifetime appointments.
yeah,
They're not even elected officials. And they don't know how to, they are not qualified to handle the law in the way that is
just,
right, fair, and justice. Yeah, but I don't, what'd you say?
just,
Yeah. They're doing their, as Susan put, the personal is political is true for them also. Yeah, that is how they do it. They just see things differently, but yeah. So they're not even qualified. I'm not saying I am, but because I would, you know, we're just going to be viewed as biased anyway, biased towards the left anyways, but there is a side that is right. And to make it legal to discriminate that's really hard to even comprehend that they got to that place. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to read that paragraph again real quick. It has become a disturbing feature of some recent opinions to criticize the decisions with which they disagree as going beyond the proper role of the judiciary, Roberts wrote. So he's taken a stab, I think it said it was, he's rebutting Kagan's critique. He's taken a stab at her. It's become a disturbing feature of some recent opinions to criticize the decisions with which they disagree as going beyond the proper role of the judiciary. So going into politics instead of their law, Roberts wrote, insisting that the court's ideological fractures are merely reasonable disagreements. So the affirmative action, the creative 303 creative legalizing discrimination. They're just reasonable disagreements about how to apply traditional tools of judicial decision making. Wow, okay, I think I better understand that. I don't know, I hope everybody else does. I know I think I get it better now. He's rebutting what Kagan went out and did speeches speaking about and criticizing the court, you know, how it's not acting like the court, and that the 6 GOP-led states lacked any direct interest in loan forgiveness program. But that actually, going back to that part there, if I'm following that correctly, you have 303 Creative. She doesn't even have anybody that she's refused service to. This is all preemptive. And in the 6 GOP-led states that sued when it came to Biden's wanting to the loan forgiveness program, they didn't have any direct interest in the loan forgiveness program, if that made sense.
That
So they
makes
didn't have any business taking it to court because it didn't affect them, if I understand that correctly.
correct.
It didn't affect them. And yet they're the ones that take it to sue, and they won. And to me, that reminds me of the 303 Creative case where nobody's harmed her, but she does this preemptive and adds a hypothetical in there as well, or not a hypothetical. She adds a fraudulent person that, or, no, I don't want to call him fraudulent, but says that this person did ask for a website and he didn't even do that. And yet they won. It seems to me those are things that should be thrown out.
Agreed.
Okay, so then he devoted the final passage of his majority opinion in the student loan case to rebutting Kagan's critique. So he's rebutting her when he says it has become a disturbing feature, Kagan publicly stating the condition of the court, of some recent opinions to criticize the decisions with which they disagree. So he's saying that these are just reasonable disagreements on how to apply traditional tools of judicial decision making. I don't know how you can call it a judicial decision making when you don't even have I don't know what you call it in the Supreme Court, but you have the defendant, and then you have, I don't know if I'm thinking that through right, but you don't have anybody that's harmed her. You don't have anybody that's harmed her. And so what kind of tools, traditional tools of decision making is he talking about? So yeah, Smith concocted the LGBTQ part to her claim, which made it fraudulent, correct? And he is married, been married for 15 years to a woman. Okay, so it is important that the public not be misled, Roberts continued, because any suggestion to the contrary, Roberts says, would be harmful to this institution. That's an eye roller. I don't know how you see that. He's calling it's important that the public not be misled, because any suggestion to the contrary would be harmful to this institution.
Well,
He's saying Kagan is misleading people, if I follow that correctly. And she's then being harmful to this great institution. I'm adding emotional words for sarcasm, forgive me.
But he's just
right.
doing the same thing the GOP usually do, is that he's making a correct statement, but he's pointing the finger at the wrong person, because it is important that the public not be misled, but he's the one misleading them, not Kagan.
Correct. He's accusing them of doing what they are doing. Go ahead, Phil.
He is calling evil good and good evil.
Yes, he is. Absolutely.
Manipulating people.
I think we're almost done with this.
Yeah, it's only 5 pages, so we're on
Let
page
me
5.
mark that real quick and see how far. Oh, good. It's okay. It's not a full page. Okay, let's fin. I'll go through it if you want.
Okay, yeah.
One prominent court watcher who saw hints that Roberts was trying to moderate the court, but was profoundly disappointed by the decisions this week was Biden. So, okay, so Biden's watching, he's a prominent court watcher and saw hints that Roberts was trying to moderate the court, is disappointed by those decisions on Thursday and Friday. Asked Thursday if the court had gone rogue and was undermining its own legitimacy, Biden replied, "This is not a normal court. There's something wrong here." Biden, who has resisted endorsing major changes to the court, didn't quite urge defiance of the court's affirmative action decision, but he came close. Let's see, Biden, who has resisted endorsing major changes to the court, didn't quite urge defiance of the court's affirmative action decision, but came close. And Biden continues here. We cannot let this decision be the last word, the president said. While the court can render a decision, it cannot change what America stands for. In an interview later in the day, Biden said he thought the court had gone beyond the precepts, even of the Conservative Federalist Society, by retreating from and overturning precedents. When I read that, I was thinking, well, the Federalist Society has well done their job then, haven't they, in preparing their judges to get on the court. Quoting, this is Biden, "It's done more to unravel basic rights and basic decisions than any court in recent history," he told Nicole Wallace on MSNBC. However, Biden also said he saw signs that the justices were attuned to the decline in public respect. So in Biden quoting, "I think that some on the court are beginning to realize their legitimacy is being questioned in ways that hadn't been questioned in the past," the president said, describing the Chief Justice as maybe in that group. Meanwhile, the ethics firestorm that descended on the court last fall hasn't abated, despite Roberts' modest attempts to satisfy the court's critics. Roberts about undisclosed trips taken by Justice Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito fueled longstanding concerns about the lack of a formal ethics code for the High Court and of any enforcement mechanism to police alleged conflicts of interest. Quoting, "It too was a barn burner of term outside 1 Street. The press on the court was unrelenting," Murray noted. "The court was kind of in our faces all year long, even when they weren't issuing decisions. I've got to think John Roberts doesn't love that." So, court gone rogue, so to speak. And as Phil put it, this is correct, that he's calling evil good and good evil. He's doing the same thing we see all the Republicans doing. He's accusing the other side of doing the very things that he's doing. Any thoughts before we close?
Nothing new under the sun.
Yeah. If there's somebody that wants to lead out in any of the Friday and Sabbath presentations, if you have anything, any articles, please let us know so that it's not all on one person. I could use the help. Please let us know that we can start sharing in some of the leading out would be great. Okay, well, if nobody has any comments, let's close in prayer. Dear God in heaven, Lord, we thank you. We thank you for this movement. We thank you for having seen something in us that you could use. As we look back at Noah's Ark, we know that there were many that came along the way and helped in building the ark. But most left and never got on that ark. I pray for each one of us that we would remain wholly consecrated to thee, that we would be sanctified through the prophetic message and be settled into the truth so that we cannot be moved. And that we would, as Christine prays, have wisdom, courage, humility, and faith. And we pray that you continue to bless, guide, and direct us as we can bring in the study of Matthew 13 and what we're actually witnessing take place. We could bring all these things together and rightly understand. I pray that each one of us would be renewed in our hearts to be diligent in our learning, desiring to grasp this message as we must, and be able to understand what the external prophets are doing. That we would be guided by the lines and not through the deceptions that are being thrown out there, especially with AI. We thank you for the privilege of being called, and we pray to be faithful and obedient and glorify thee on earth by reflecting your character perfectly. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, God bless everybody. We'll see you Friday night.
Thank you. See you Friday.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Lovely.